As you're turning there, I kind of want to give you a background of what we're looking at in Genesis chapter 28, because we're looking in the life of Jacob. And I want to go back so everybody understands exactly where we are. God called Abraham out of the land of Ur. He decided that he was going to make a great nation out of Abraham. So he told him that he would make his descendants as the sands of the sea. So he calls Abraham out to be a peculiar and different people. And Abraham, instead of having all these sons, he only has one son that God decided to use in the line for Israel. And he had Isaac. And Isaac had two sons, and their names were Jacob and Esau. And so we're looking at the third person down the line from the beginning of Abraham to the nation of Israel, which, by the way, is the line of the Messiah. So it's very important to God. And so as we're looking at the life of Jacob, Jacob is the second born. He's the second oldest. In the Jewish household, that didn't leave you with much. It wasn't a very important kind of role. And Jacob is named Jacob, which means the word, and remember this for the rest of the sermon, trickster, or someone who is tricky. Because it says in the scripture that they fought in the womb. And what they were fighting about, or if they were just moving, we don't know. But the thought of the day was the fact that Jacob, in his infancy, was trying to get out first so he could be the oldest. That probably wasn't the case, but they named him trickster when he was born Jacob. And so in the story of Jacob and Esau, Esau had the rightful heir, which means the line of the Messiah would come through him. All the nation of Israel would come through him. But as the boys grew, Esau was a man who liked the outdoors, and Jacob was a man who stayed more indoors. And Esau had no respect for God or his birthright. And the birthright was something not that we probably don't understand today, but the birthright was a spiritual thing. And because he had no regard for spiritual things or for God, what he did is after he was hunting on a long day, I kind of like Esau, even though he was a bad dude, because he was a hunter, he was an outdoorsman, but he's out hunting, he comes back, and Jacob offers him a bowl of soup or porridge or whatever you want to call it in order that he might give him his birthright, which seems ridiculous. But as we really look at the story a little closer, what we're seeing is Esau thought nothing of his birthright because he thought nothing of God. So it was not a big deal to him in which to do so. So he trades this precious thing, his birthright, over to Jacob, his younger son, for a bowl of soup, which is a whole cool sermon in and by itself, but we're not going to go there today. So now we have Jacob, and he is growing up with Esau, and for some reason, Rebekah, Jacob's mother, likes him a lot more than the other son. So it comes time for daddy to die, and he's getting ready to die, and he calls for his oldest son, Esau, to come before him that he might give him the blessing. And we need to understand what the blessing is, and I'm going to take a while to explain. We understand this text perfectly. The blessing was more than just, blessing or peace be with you blessing. The blessing was an inheritance. And so when the oldest son would come before the father, he would give the blessing and he would tell the son all that he was to do. And what was taking place, the son would take the place of the father as the head of the house, as the head of the household, as a spiritual leader. Whatever trade that individual had, that son would pick up that trade, take the torch, and he would now be the patriarch of that family. So it was a big deal. And let's see, who am I comfortable with? Jim, I'm going to embarrass you. This is how big of a deal it was. Even at Abraham, a lot of times, if this squeals, turn me down. It shouldn't. We should be all right. But they would have him come before him, and a lot of times you'll read, and it didn't make sense to me for a long time. The older would say, put your hand underneath my thigh and swear to me. Or put your hand underneath my thigh while I give this birthright. And so, don't slap me for touching your thigh, but I'm going to touch your thigh. This is just a warning. Okay, we good? All right. And so I couldn't figure out, what does this mean, this hand under the thigh? And then I started thinking about it, and maybe I'm wrong. I haven't read anyone else think about it. But if I have my hand under Jim's, don't slap me, under Jim's thigh, where's my face? Sorry, breath. Okay. There is no number of letters after your name, ADD, ADHD, whatever it is, that you can get away from this conversation because you are 8 inches away from that individual's nose. This is a serious deal. When you're looking at somebody like this, you can't dodge away. You are hearing what they are saying. You ever talk to one of your kids and they're doing one of these? You're like, look at me. And then you get their attention. Well, this is a face-to-face. So this is a big deal. And so Isaac is expecting his oldest son Esau to come. Many of us know this story, but for those of you who don't, I want to explain it. So what happens is the mother of the two boys who loves Jacob begins being a trickster herself. So the dad says, Esau, I want you to go out into the field, and I want you to kill a deer and make the venison that I love, that I might eat it and I might give my blessing. So Esau takes off. For all you hunters, obviously he was a bow hunter because he was gone a long time, and we know it takes a whole season to kill a deer with a bow. So he's going. Mom calls Jacob and says, look, you need to go before your father, and you're going to get the blessing. Jacob says, he knows what Esau smells like. He's in the field. He knows what he feels like. So mom actually makes up this food that tastes like venison. Evidently, the guy's up in years and doesn't notice. And then she takes sheepskin and she puts it on Jacob's arms and on the back of his neck, the soft part of his neck, it says, and sends him in before his father in order that he might receive the blessing. So Jacob, once again, has tricked in the womb, supposedly. He has tricked his brother out of his birthright. And now here he is wearing clothing of a sheep on his arms in order to trick his brother out of the very blessing. So he goes before his father, and in a matter of a chapter and a half that we're not going to read, his father thinks it's Esau and gives him the blessing. Later, Esau comes in from his hunting trip with venison and says, surprise, Dad. If he was trying to surprise him, he was doing fine. Because Dad was like, who are you? Because I just blessed Esau. And Esau, to say the least, was kind of ticked off at this point at his little brother. Because now what had been done, for some reason, Dad said, I'm not taking it back. The blessing has landed. And now Esau is a little perturbed because he says, and I quote, I will kill him. So his mind is set on killing Jacob. If you're a hunter-fisherman of the group, you're picturing like I am. Jacob is probably some feeble sissy boy that's been around the house. You've been out in the field hunting. You've been out in the field fishing. You can shoot a bow. You can use a knife. This kid doesn't have a shot. Mama knows this. So this is what I want you to do, Jacob. Go to my family. Run away. I don't want you marrying the people around here anyway. I don't want you involved with them. Go down there with my family. Laban is his name. He's my brother. And I want you to hang out with him. Stay away from your brother. Find a wife there and go with those people. And so he goes. Yeah, this is a whole book. Follow me. So he goes to this country where his mom tells him to go. He's running away from his brother. There he meets Laban, and he meets Laban's daughter, and he falls madly in love like in Hollywood. And he says, I want this girl. And Laban, who is a trickster also, evidently it runs in the family from his mother's side, says, okay, you work for me 7 years, and I'll give her to you. So Jacob this girl must have been cute, because he worked for 7 years. Guys, we bought flowers and candy. 7 years he works to get this woman to be his wife. And so the wedding night comes. I don't know how this all went down, but he wakes up and guess what? It wasn't the girl he worked 7 years for. It was her older sister. I imagine it went something like this. So he is not happy. So he goes to Laban and he said, what is the problem here? I worked 7 years for this girl. You told me I could have her. And he said, well, these aren't the ways around here. You have to marry the older one first. But I tell you what, you work another 7 years. I'll let you have the younger one. And so he says yes. So now he has worked 14. Girls, this is true love. The man has worked 14 years to get her hand in marriage. So he works 14 years in order that he might marry her. And so he does this, and after he marries her, he wants to leave. So he takes all his stuff, and he leaves, and he tricks his father-in-law, out of his sheep and out of his herds by doing things that he thought he was tricking, but in all reality, God was just blessing him, and he wasn't even tricking at all. And so he is leaving. His father-in-law is behind him, and he's going to another country. And now we're almost to the text, I promise. You're probably thinking it's about time to close. It's not. So he lays down to sleep in the middle of this vast nowhere land. And during his sleep, as he is sleeping, he sees a vision. And in his vision, for those of you who are Led Zeppelin fans, the stairway to heaven, this is what he's seeing. The heavens open up, a stairway comes down. There are angels ascending and descending. And there he sees and talks to these angels. And at this point, he is very excited about his God that he has just met for the first time. Okay, now we're ready to read the text. If you're with me, Genesis chapter 28. This is where we're at in verse 16, I beg your pardon. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put his head on, and he set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of the place Bethel, But the name of that city had been Luz previously. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me I will surely give a tenth to you. This morning, as we were in this text, we had our baptism this morning by 3 ladies who had previously been baptized, and they had come to a point in their life where they knew who Jesus Christ was, but there was a second point in their life when they made Him their Lord and Master and repented of their sin. There are 2 kinds of faith, and this morning we're going to look at those 2 kinds of faith in the Old Testament here in Genesis, in the life of Jacob. The first kind of faith that we're going to look at is Bethel faith. And the word Bethel means the house of God. So Jacob finds this place, calls it the house of God, and this is the faith that he has. And we're going to look at these 2 types of faith this morning. Jacob is very excited, and he has supposedly found God where he's at, and he is in an emotional place. Verse 17, what we just read, says this, and he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Let's take a look. Let's examine of what's going on in the life of Jacob. That water was hot this morning. It was like humid. I am sweating. I beg your pardon. So Jacob is having an experience with God, and it's a very emotional experience. Jacob is excited. Jacob sees, can you imagine seeing a stairway open up? Angels are coming down. God's talking to you. What we didn't see in these verses is God is giving him all the promises. He doesn't understand the promises are coming to him not because of who he is, but because of who Abraham is and what God is going to do through his line. He is falling in line with that. So God is telling him, I am going to make a great and mighty nation out of you, as I promised your father Abraham and your father Isaac. And so he is stoked. And so here he is in this place, and he's having a very emotional, exciting time. And this is what he says, and I quote out of these verses, how awesome is this place? Bethel, house of God. His focus of worship is not on God the Father. His focus of worship is on the place in which he is at. How awesome is this place? He doesn't say how awesome is this God. He says how awesome in this place. So as he's looking at this situation, he's not excited about what God has done. He is not excited about that God has found him. He thinks in his own mind that he has found the place where God dwells, and he is so awesome, he actually found God. People looking for him, I flat out find him. Here he is. And this is how ridiculous, as we look at the story, is. Since he found where God lived, he was going to do this great and mighty thing for him and set up a pillar for him for it to be his house. Do you know what he used a stone for before it was a pillar? I said that subconsciously, a pillow. So Jacob finds the God of the universe in his mind, and he's going to establish it by creating a house for him. And he says, here you go, God. Here's a rock the size of a pillow. That's where you live. This is Jacob's mindset. Bethel, house of God. Here you go. This is God's house. He is just beside himself. What an awesome experience. What an awesome place. Bethel, this is the house of God, and I have found it. He had no idea that God was finding him, but he found him a little house to stay in. This is going to make sense in a minute. Now look at our relationship for those of us who have a Bethel faith. Put them together. Because there are many. Jesus said, many will come to me that day and say, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, depart from me. I never knew you. There are many that have this Bethel faith that we're talking about. This Bethel faith is, I found a place where God is. Our rock is the church building. I spent years working in this church building. This church building is awesome, and this is where God stays. And so, since I am so excited about this thing that I have with God, I build him a little building, and that's where he stays. Now, I go there once a week, twice a week. If I'm real good, 3 times a week. And I go there, and I pay homage to him, and everything's okie dokie. But I leave him there, and then I go about my business for the rest of the week, because he lives there, and I live here. But I found him. He's down the street on the corner, 345 County Line Road. That's where God lives, Bethel faith. Bethel, once again, house of God. This is the mentality. He's having an emotional experience, and it's just temporary. And this is how we know this. In this text, we're going to read in a couple chapters in a moment. There is a 20-year span that he's out courting these 2 girls for 20 years. And that 20-year span after this experience, it is never again mentioned in the text that he ever prays again. He never comes before God again. You know why? He doesn't need to. He found God. He built him a house. He knows where he lives. He's done, which we're going to see in a minute, cut a deal with him, and life is good. Because now Jacob has everything he wants, and on top of that, he's got the God of the universe in his pocket. He's living large. And he goes on about his business. But his whole experience had to do with external things. Look at verse 20 and 21. It says this, Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I may come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be my God's house, and all that you give of me, I will surely give a tenth to you. Now, as we look at this a second time, do you see how ridiculous this is? God, let me tell you what. This is your lucky day. Because if you will feed me, clothe me, take me back to my father's house in peace, and then the main one is, and keep me in this way that I'm going, guess what? I'm going to let you be my God. Ouch. He had no idea. Jacob, in his mind, thought he was a righteous man. And on top of that, guess what? I'm even going to give you 10% of everything I got. I know, stop it. I know. 10%. It's all you, baby. It's all you. That's Jacob's mindset. It's a terrible place to be. Because in that mindset, those who are there, they don't realize they're there. There's a place for God, and that's where he stays. I built this for him, and this is the relationship. It's all external. Everything that God can give me is the only thing that is on the mind of the Bethel believer. I come to God because he can give me this. He gives me eternal life. He gives me peace. If I have a problem, I'll go to the rock, and I'll pray about the problem, and then God will fix the problem. Then I go back to life as usual. And always remember where the rock is, just in case little Joey gets the freckles or the whatever disease he might have, or the pig flu or whatever it is, swine flu. And then if the bills are bad or my wife's cheating on me, I can just go to the rock and just say a magical little prayer, a little genie pops out, and everything's all good. Life is awesome. This is Bethel faith, the house of God. It's like the teenager that wants a job, and they're so excited about the job, but in all reality, they're not excited about the job at all. What they're excited about is a paycheck. And so as they're excited about this job, they get to work and they realize, oh, there's more to this than getting a check at the end of the week. And all that kind of fizzles out the window because they didn't realize they were going to have to do things that they didn't normally do that was different in their life. That's the mindset of the Bethel believer. It's all about me. I led someone to Christ in the last 3 years, and as I talked to them, they said, you know what? Years I've been in church and I've prayed and I've asked God for things and there were problems in my life and he has answered them. But yet at the same time, I know I didn't have a relationship. But I prayed to him and he answered my prayers. What is different now? Why now do I feel like his spirit is inside of me? And I said, this is why. Because all of your life to this point, you've been going to God and saying, what can you give me? But now when God is coming to your life, you realize that you need to give him everything. And at this point, instead of saying, what can you give me? Because of all that you have given me, instead, you are saying, whatever I have is yours, and I give it to you. That's the opposite of Bethel faith. And Jacob was the gimme, gimme, gimme kind of faith that he can control. And the main thing is, he said, keep me in this way in which I am going. What that is saying is, here are the stipulations in order for me to follow you and for you to be my God. But you will not change me. All these things, the last but not least, keep me in this way that I'm going. I will not conform to what you want. These are the rules. Let's lay it out clearly. Keep me in this way that I'm going. I'll let you be my God. Bethel faith. It's a fake faith. It's not a real faith. It's a satanic faith. It's the faith that's talked about in James, that even the demons believe and tremble at the name of Jesus. Yes, he's there, but will I trust him? No. Yes, he's there. Do I call him Lord? Yes. Does he rule my life? No. Bethel faith. Faith is the house of God. But this is how awesome God is. At that, as Jacob is in God's face, telling him these things that he doesn't even realize, a holy and righteous God that he's dealing with, God is still patient. God is still drawing. And instead of telling him, you know what? I can, like I talk about in Genesis, just go on your little head, make another one just like you, and he won't be a little snot like you are, and we'll start all over. Instead of that, God, in Romans 5:8 later, writes, but God showed his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So even though Jacob was in this mindset, God kept running after Jacob and drawing him. When Jacob wouldn't come in these 20 years, God finally takes him to a place where Jacob has no choice. In this story, Jacob is running from his father-in-law because he stole his daughters and all his stuff. And unbeknownst to him, his wife's even stole his father-in-law's idols. Everything the man had is gone. Jacob's running. As he is going, it's been 20 years. All of a sudden, his servants come and say, this guy named Esau is coming this way and he wants to see you. Jacob, I am sure, is about to have a tizzy fit because he remembers that boy wants to kill me, and he promised that he is going to. So Jacob starts sending droves of things as gifts to him, trying to ward off his brothers so he won't die. The men come back and say, yes, he's still coming, and he has 400 men with him. And Jacob is going with women and sheep and no way to protect himself. Jacob is now put in a place, by God to where he has nowhere else to go except to him. Was it his design? No, it was God's. Because God loved him enough to cause things in his life to happen, to force him to say, God, help me. God, I got nothing here. You have got to come to my rescue. When I was in high school the school system was terrible. For those of you who haven't heard my testimony, and my parents said, if you want to go to private school, you can. I knew every day I was going to get a fight. I was going to beat somebody up or get beat up, probably the latter. I had no desire. And so I said, yes, I'll go to this private school. I had no idea that reason that God had ordained all of this and these workings was in order to get me to a place where I might hear and understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. Two of these girls that were baptized this morning, I'm so old I'm calling women girls. Two of these girls that were baptized this morning, God put them, and it's none of my business to tell you, but as they gave me their testimony, in places in their life where all they could do is look up, put them in a position to where all they could do, even though they thought, because they had a Bethel faith, they thought they knew him, God put them in a position because he loved them to force them to look and say, God, I give my life to you because he loved them and you and me that much. Because Bethel faith isn't a saving faith. So here's Jacob in all these troubles, and finally, Jacob is to the point where he's ready to give up, and he's ready to give God everything because he has nothing in which to trick with any longer. He has no power in his life to do anything. Turn with me, if you will, to Genesis chapter 32, the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey. We're going to read verses 22 through 32. We're looking at Peniel faith now. He had the faith, we're going to read in a second, the house of God, Bethel faith. But here in verse 22 it says this, after what we just talked about. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and he sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. This is Jacob talking. I will not let you go unless you bless me. Let me stop there. Remember what blessing means? Blessing means an inheritance, taking on the Father's traits and doing what he does. I will not let you go unless you bless me. Verse 27, so he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall be no longer called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. Jacob just went from a Bethel believer to a Peniel believer. And this is what the words mean. There's so much richness in these verses when we look deeper. Once again, Bethel, I've said this 15 times because I don't want anybody to forget, means the house of God. Now, he comes to Peniel, and that means the face of God. The worship changed from a place to a face, from a position to a God, from being religious to being in a relationship. He sees God's face, face to face. In verse 24 it says, then Jacob was left alone. There needs to come a point in our lives, if we're believers, that we're alone with God and take a real evaluation of where we're at. Not looking at anybody else or any church member or any church buildings. It was him and it was God. And they were alone. And Jacob had to be there in misery to understand how desperately he needed a relationship with God. And it was no longer an experience, but it was a relationship. Look at verse 24 with me in chapter 32 again. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. God loved Jacob enough not to say, do you want this? No? Okay, I'll leave you alone. God wrestled with Jacob, with his spirit. He strove with him, begged him, drew him to him that he might come to know the true saving knowledge of God the Father. That's how much he loved him. Folks, that's how much he loves us. For those of you who are truly saved, do you remember that time? Do you? I remember I had no idea I was lost. Then I found out and I didn't want to admit it. And then I remember God wrestling with my heart. What am I going to do? Your parents are going to think you're nuts. You've already been baptized once, but you're in a Baptist church. You're brethren. This is ridiculous. All these things going through my mind. And the Holy Spirit of God said, Steve, will you repent or not? And I gave my life to him. After that wrestling, my life completely changed. And so did his. Jacob means trickster. Israel means God prevails. Do you see how deep that is? From one who tries to trick his way through life, Jacob, God changes his name to God prevails. And this is why this is so important. Because until God takes complete control of our lives, we have no relationship with him. Bethel faith is dead faith. Until we give him everything, he has control of what we eat, hear me, what we drink, where we go, how we speak, how we dress, who we're friends with, who we sleep with, what we watch on television. All of this is affected. If we can do all this without any worry in our minds, my friend, we do not have a true saving faith in Jesus Christ. We don't have a Peniel faith, because in Peniel faith, you are in the face of God. And God changes him from Jacob to Israel because God prevailed in his life. Verses 24 through 26 says this. Then Jacob, I read 24, but I'm going to do it again. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. At this point in his life, he's begging God to change him. He's begging God for that inheritance. And God does something, I think, that is so absolutely miraculous. He breaks Jacob down, but he also breaks him down and gives him a physical attribute so everyone can see that God broke him. It is a constant reminder in Jacob's life, every time he takes a step, of that one, which is a Christophany, for those of you who study deep, a picture of Christ, or Christ coming in the Old Testament to work in the life of a believer. Every time he takes a step, he is limping, remembering that God has changed him forever. The people of Israel would not eat that piece of meat because they remembered continually. When you have a real encounter with God, he changes your life forever. God gave us this physical detail so that we might grasp it. God has got to break us before he can make us. We cannot have what we had and add on what he wants us to have. Everything is out the window and it starts new. A brand new, fresh faith in Jesus Christ. I don't know how many were here. I've used this illustration before, but I absolutely love it. So once again, if you've heard it, act like it's new. My son took a college course. Now, we couldn't afford to send him to school. We made sure he had gasoline in a car, clothes, place to live, and all that, so he can go out and pursue his dream. And obviously his dream was making pottery, because I've got an entire house of pottery. I've got 15 mixed-match bowls. I've got a crooked cross. I've got lamps that I'll never use. Can't throw them away. He doesn't even live in the state, but I know he's going to come over and be like, Dad, where'd those go? So I've got them. So he spent all this time, money, and energy to go to school so he could learn how to do pottery. I don't know how you make a living at doing pottery, but that's a whole completely different story. So he comes home, and I'm asking him about his clay class because I'm a good dad. I'm a good dad. So he's explaining to me how to throw clay, which is when you put it on a wheel. I did not know this. It's called throwing clay. I'm thinking they're having clay fights, but they're throwing it. Put it on a wheel, and you. So I said, you just throw a clump of clay on there and go? He said, no, it's a lot deeper than that, Dad, because he did take 3 years of it. So you take the clay and you cut it into 1-inch strips, and then you turn it and you cut it in 1 inch again, and you get it into 1-inch squares. And then you take each one of those squares and you break it down. And he said, if you don't break the clay down, if you remember in Isaiah, you are the potter and I am the clay. He said, Dad, if you don't break the clay down, it's too hard to work with and you can't form it into anything. It's worthless. And he said, when you break it down, you hear little pops because the clay has natural air bubbles in it. Hear me. And if you just throw the clay without working the air bubbles out, what happens? When it gets into the oven and heats it, it explodes and it won't last. Oh, the pictures we have in the Old Testament that we don't look at. And my mind just went crazy on this. And until God can take us and break us into pieces and break us down and remove all the impurities, He will never be able to do anything in our lives. Jacob, for 20 years, never said another prayer, relied on himself. If he would have died, he would have spent eternity separated from God. And we could look in the text earlier, and it says this. I wrote it down so I can find it so you didn't think I was lying. Well, evidently, I didn't write it down well enough, but I'm going to quote it to you. You can find it when you get home. God comes earlier in the chapter, Jacob, and he says, I am the God of your father Abraham and of your father Isaac. And he stops. He never said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or your God. He said, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac. After this Bethel experience, he wasn't the God of Jacob. He knew who he was. Like I said earlier, and many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, I say, depart from me. I never knew you. He knew who he was, but there was no saving faith. Same in the life of Jacob. So here Jacob is in a changed life because God was able to break him, put him in a position to draw him to him, and he saved him. This is now an eternal salvation that he has. Look at verse 31 with me. It says this, just as he crossed over the Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. I know I've already read this, but I just wanted to hit home. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that shrank. It was an eternal experience. The change was forever. It wasn't an exciting moment. It was a life-changing experience in God. This morning, I ask you, do we, as a church, do we as individuals have a Bethel faith or a Peniel faith? And it's a huge question. Because in Sunday school we were talking, and Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and all through the New Testament continually lays out two things. There is either a fountain that gives forth fresh water or salt water. There's either thorns or there's fruit. There is either a house that is on a solid ground or a house that is on sand. And over there's two. There's either a wide gate or a narrow gate. There's a wide way and a narrow way. And these ways, many will be the ones that lead to destruction, but few. So the question is, if there are going to be myriads and myriads of people with a Bethel faith, why would we be so prideful to say that wouldn't be me? Because all of those that are on that faith are saying the same thing. So as we examine ourselves and look at our lives, do we have a faith that is the house of God, or do we have a faith that's the face of God? When we think of Luke 9:23, he says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Have we truly, hear me today please, have we as individuals truly given our life to Christ? Are we playing games? Are we making deals? Do we have a rock that we're laying out, a place for him to stay? Because if we're playing games, our eternity is doomed, and we will never have fruit in this life either. This morning, where is your faith? Are you secure? 3 girls were baptized. They went from Bethel to Peniel faith. Where are you at?